April 1945, Mannheim, Germany. The crumbling city lay under a blanket of spring rain as American troops moved through the muddy streets, their presence marking the final days of a conflict that had consumed the world for nearly 6 years. Among these soldiers were the men of the 761st Tank Battalion, a segregated unit of African-American tankers whose arrival in the small Rhine town would forever alter the course of countless lives. The citizens of Mannheim believed this occupation would be temporary, a brief indignity to be endured before life could return to normal. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What unfolded in the months and years ahead would challenge generations of cultural beliefs and transform both the occupiers and the occupied in ways that neither could possibly imagine. Lieutenant James Hendricks stood at the edge of town, rain dripping from his helmet as he consulted his map. The 28-year-old teacher from Detroit had led his platoon through hundreds of miles of combat and now found himself responsible for maintaining order in this section of Mannheim. His orders were clear: establish a command post, secure key facilities, and begin implementing the denazification protocols established by Allied command. "Sir, we've located suitable headquarters in the town hall," reported Sergeant William Coleman, a stocky former sharecropper from Georgia whose quiet competence had made him Hendricks' most trusted subordinate. "The building's intact, has working utilities, and offers a clear view of the main square." "Good work, Coleman. Move the men in and set up communications. I want a meeting with whatever local officials are left within the hour," Hendricks replied, folding his map. A few blocks away, in a modest 3-story home that had somehow survived the bombing raids, 17-year-old Margaret Weber stood at her bedroom window, watching the American tanks roll past. Her father, Otto Weber, a factory foreman and lifelong resident of Mannheim, stood rigidly beside her, his face a mask of controlled emotion. "Keep away from the windows, Margaret," he said quietly. "And you will not leave the house until I say it's safe. These men are not to be trusted, especially those ones," he added, gesturing toward a group of black soldiers directing traffic at the intersection. "But father, the fighting is over," Margaret replied, her voice barely audible above the rumble of military vehicles. "Aren't we supposed to cooperate with the Americans now?" Otto's jaw tightened. "We will follow their rules because we must. But there will be no fraternization in this family. Do you understand? None whatsoever." Margaret nodded silently, but her eyes remained fixed on the soldiers below, particularly a tall figure who moved with unusual grace for someone in such heavy equipment. She had never seen a black person before, except in propaganda films, and the reality was nothing like she had been taught to expect. At the town hall, Lieutenant Hendricks faced the assembled representatives of Mannheim's remaining civil authority. The mayor had fled days earlier, leaving behind a fragmented municipal government headed by Ernst Hoffmann, the 62-year-old director of city services, who now sat across the table, flanked by a handful of clerks and minor officials. "Herr Hoffmann," Hendricks began, speaking through an interpreter, "under the terms of military governance, I'm establishing a provisional administration for this sector. Your cooperation will make this transition easier for everyone." Hoffmann, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and trembling hands, nodded stiffly. "We will comply with all regulations, Lieutenant. The people of Mannheim are law-abiding citizens." "I'm glad to hear it," Hendricks replied. "My first orders are simple: enforce the curfew, report any resistance activities, and assist with the distribution of emergency rations. We'll begin civilian registration tomorrow." As the meeting concluded, Hoffmann lingered, waiting until the other Germans had filed out. "Lieutenant," he said hesitantly, "there is something you should know." Hendricks raised an eyebrow. "Go on. Your soldiers—" Hoffmann paused, searching for diplomatic phrasing. "Some of your men are causing concern among our citizens." "Concern?" Hendricks' voice sharpened. "Have my men violated regulations?" No, Hoffmann said quickly. "Nothing like that. But you must understand, our people have never. That is to say, we are not accustomed to black soldiers," Hendricks finished for him, his expression unchanging. "I understand your concern, Herr Hoffmann, But my men are United States Army personnel under my command. They will be treated with the same respect as any other occupation forces. Is that clear?" "Of course, Lieutenant," Hoffman replied, his eyes downcast. "I meant no offense. I merely thought you should be aware of the cultural situation." Hendricks leaned forward slightly. "The cultural situation is changing, Herr Hoffman, for all of us." By early May, the initial tension of occupation had settled into an uneasy routine. The 761st established a motor pool in what had been a municipal garage, repairing vehicles not only for military use, but also restoring essential civilian transportation. Sergeant Coleman supervised this operation with methodical precision, keeping detailed records of every part, every hour of labor, and every vehicle serviced. It was here that Margaret Weber first encountered Private First Class Samuel Davis, a 24-year-old mechanic from Philadelphia who had studied engineering before the war interrupted his education. The meeting was entirely accidental. Margaret had been sent to deliver paperwork regarding her father's position at the manufacturing plant, now under Allied control, and needed to have forms stamped at the motor pool. "Can I help you, miss?" Davis asked in English, wiping his hands on a rag as Margareta hesitantly entered the garage. Margaret froze momentarily, her limited English failing her as she tried to formulate a response. Instead, she held out the papers with a slightly trembling hand. Davis smiled reassuringly and called out, "Hey, Fisher, we need some translation over here." Corporal Fisher, a German-American from Milwaukee who served as the unit's primary interpreter, ambled over and quickly explained the situation to Davis. "Tell her we can help with this," Davis said. "These need to go to Lieutenant Hendricks for approval, but I can take her there if she's willing to wait while I clean up." As Fisher translated, Margaret nodded gratefully, trying not to stare at Davis, whose warm smile contrasted sharply with everything she had been taught to expect. When Fisher was called away to assist with another matter, she and Davis were left in awkward silence. Davis, sensing her discomfort, pointed to himself. "Samuel," he said clearly, then pointed to her with a questioning look. "Margaret," she replied softly, the first word she had spoken directly to him. "Margaret," he repeated, his pronunciation making her name sound exotic to her own ears. "Nice to meet you." The walk to headquarters took less than 10 minutes, but it felt much longer to Margaret, who was painfully aware of the stares from both Americans and Germans as she walked alongside the tall black soldier. Davis seemed oblivious to the attention, pointing out rebuilding efforts and occasionally offering simple English words, bridge at street, building. At headquarters, Lieutenant Hendricks reviewed the paperwork quickly. "Your father is Otto Weber?" he asked through Fisher. "I met him yesterday at the factory inspection, a serious man." Margaret nodded. "Yes, sir. He takes everything seriously." Hendricks smiled slightly as he signed the forms. "Tell him we appreciate his cooperation. The sooner we get essential industries running again, the sooner everyone's life can improve." On her way home, Margaret took a deliberately circuitous route, wanting time to process this strange new experience. The Americans were nothing like the monsters described in the final, desperate propaganda of the regime. They were orderly, often generous with their rations, and seemed genuinely interested in restoring basic services. The black soldiers, in particular, defied every characterization she had been taught. When she finally arrived home, her father was waiting, his face taut with worry and anger. "Where have you been?" he demanded. "You were seen with one of them." "I had to deliver your papers," Margaret explained. "The soldier was only escorting me to headquarters." Otto grabbed the stamped documents from her hands. "In the future, you will ask Herr Hoffman to handle such matters. No daughter of mine will be seen consorting with those people. Do you understand what people are saying? Do you want to bring shame upon this family?" Margaret looked down, her cheeks burning. "I was only following instructions, Father." "Well, now you have new instruction," Otto said firmly. "You will not speak to them. You will not look at them. You will take the longest way around town if necessary to avoid them. Am I making myself clear?" "Yes, Father," she answered automatically, but inside a small spark of rebellion had been kindled. As spring gave way to summer, the restrictions of occupation gradually eased. Curfews were extended, civilian movement became less regulated, and modest social gatherings were permitted. The American authorities organized a series of community programs designed to build goodwill, including public health initiatives, educational exchanges, and even occasional entertainment events. For the men of the 761st, these changes brought both opportunities and challenges. Lieutenant Hendricks established strict protocols regarding fraternization, mindful that any misstep by his men would be magnified by existing prejudices. Yet he also recognized the importance of humanizing their presence, showing the local population that these soldiers were more than just occupiers. Sergeant Coleman approached Hendricks with a proposal in late June, as they reviewed supply requisitions in the headquarters. "Sir, the men have been talking," Coleman began, his usual confidence tempered with caution. "With your permission, we'd like to organize a musical performance for the community. Davis plays trumpet, Taylor's good on piano if we can find one that works, and about half the 3rd platoon can sing like they're in a church choir." Hendricks considered the idea. "You think the locals are ready for that kind of interaction, Coleman?" "Honestly, sir, no," Coleman admitted. "But they'll never be ready if we don't start somewhere. Music might be a way to reach them without words getting in the way." After consulting with military government officers, Hendricks approved the concert for the first weekend in July, to be held in the town square. Notices were posted throughout Mannheim, describing it as a goodwill event with free coffee and limited rations distributed afterward. The announcement generated intense debate within German households. Many older residents dismissed it as propaganda, while others saw it as an opportunity to receive extra food. For younger citizens like Margaret, starved for any form of entertainment after years of war, the prospect of music, American music no less, was irresistible. "Absolutely not," Otto Weber declared when Margaret mentioned the concert. "This is precisely the sort of thing I've warned you about." "But father, everyone is going," Margaret protested. "Elsa Schmidt's mother is allowing her to attend, and even Herr Hoffmann has encouraged people to participate." "Hoffmann is a weak man who bends whichever way the wind blows," Otto replied dismissively. "I don't care what everyone else is doing. This family still has principles." Margaret's mother, Helena, who had remained largely silent through the occupation, quietly intervened. "Perhaps I could accompany her, Otto. There would be no impropriety with me present." Otto looked at his wife in surprise. Helena rarely contradicted him, especially in front of their daughter. "You too? Have you both lost your senses?" "It's just music, Otto," Helena said softly. "And we could use the extra rations." The mention of practical benefits gave Otto pause. Food remained scarce, and his position at the factory, while secure, provided barely enough to sustain the family. After several moments of internal struggle, he grudgingly conceded. "You will stay together at all times," he instructed. "You will accept the rations but minimize all other interaction. And you will leave at the first sign of anything inappropriate. Am I understood?" Margaret hugged her father impulsively. "Thank you. I promise we'll be careful." On the day of the concert, the town square was transformed. A makeshift stage had been constructed from military transport pallets, decorated with whatever flowers local children could gather. Rows of folding chairs faced the stage, with standing room around the perimeter. By mid-afternoon, nearly 300 Mannheim residents had gathered, their curiosity overcoming lingering reservations. Private Davis, wearing a freshly pressed uniform and holding his trumpet, peered through the window of the town hall, which the soldiers were using as a preparation area. "That's quite a crowd out there," he remarked to Corporal Taylor, who was flexing his fingers in preparation for the piano. "Sure is," Taylor agreed. "Bet half of them are just here for the coffee and K-rations." "Can't blame them for that," Davis replied, "but maybe a few will stay for the music." The performance began with familiar military marches, played with precision, if not professional quality. The audience remained reserved but attentive. Gradually, the program shifted to more distinctly American styles, swing arrangements, blues progressions, and finally spirituals that showcased the powerful harmonies of the soldiers' choir. From their seats near the middle of the audience, Margarete and Helena Weber watched with increasing engagement. Helena maintained a proper German matron's composure, but her foot tapped almost imperceptibly to the rhythm. Margaret made no attempt to hide her enjoyment, her face alight with discovery, as Davis stepped forward for a trumpet solo, his instrument catching the early evening sunlight. The music itself became a character in this unfolding drama, creating a shared experience that transcended the divisions of recent history. For many in the audience, this was their first exposure to jazz and blues, forms that had been denounced as degenerate during the previous regime. The unfamiliar cadences, the improvisation, the emotional expressiveness, all stood in stark contrast to the regimented culture from which they were emerging. When the concert concluded, the soldiers moved through the crowd distributing promised rations and coffee. Davis, trumpet still in hand, found himself face to face with Margaret and her mother. "Guten Tag," he said, one of the few German phrases he had mastered. "Did you enjoy the music?" Helena accepted the offered rations with a polite nod, but remained silent. Margaret, however, smiled openly. "Yes, very much," she replied in halting English, words she had been practicing since their brief encounter at the motor pool. "You play beautiful." Davis looked surprised and pleased at her effort. "Thank you. Music is universal," he said, deliberately choosing simple words. Before the conversation could continue, Helena took Margaret's arm firmly. "Wir müssen gehen," she said, indicating it was time to leave. As they walked away, Margarete glanced back once, catching Davis's gaze. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition that would have profound consequences in the months ahead. The following weeks saw a subtle shift in Mannheim's atmosphere. The success of the concert had created a tentative bridge between occupiers and occupied, with music serving as a neutral territory where cultural exchange could begin. Lieutenant Hendricks, recognizing the opportunity, authorized additional community programs, including English language classes for adults and sports activities for children. Otto Weber viewed these developments with increasing alarm. "They're trying to win over our children," he complained to Helena one evening after Margaret had gone to bed. "First music, now baseball and English lessons. This isn't about rebuilding Germany. It's about turning us into Americans." Helena, who had been mending a shirt by the light of their single working lamp, looked up thoughtfully. "Is that necessarily something to fear, Otto? Our old ways led us to destruction. Perhaps we should be open to new ideas." Otto stared at his wife as if seeing a stranger. "How can you say such things? Have you forgotten everything we believed in?" "I haven't forgotten anything," Helena replied quietly, "including what those beliefs cost us. Our son, Otto. Our Martin." The mention of their son, killed on the Eastern Front in 1943, hung heavily in the air between them. It was a subject they rarely discussed, the wound still too raw. "Martin died for Germany," Otto said finally, his voice hoarse. "Martin died because old men sent young men to fight for pride and power," Helena countered, a rare flash of anger breaking through her customary reserve. "I don't want Margaret's future sacrificed on the same altar." Unbeknownst to her parents, Margaret had begun attending the English classes offered at the community centre 3 evenings a week. She justified the deception by telling herself that language skills would be valuable in the new Germany that was slowly taking shape around them. The real motivation, however, was the knowledge that Private Davis sometimes assisted the regular instructor, a sergeant from the military government detachment. The classes became the highlight of Margaret's week, bright spots in the otherwise dreary routine of post-war existence. She applied herself diligently, advancing quickly from basic greetings to simple conversations. Davis, for his part, maintained appropriate professional distance, treating all students with equal attention and respect. It was during the walk home after one such class in late July that chance, or perhaps fate, intervened. A sudden summer thunderstorm erupted as Margaret was halfway to her house, the rain so heavy that she took shelter under the awning of a damaged but still standing bookshop. She was resigned to waiting out the downpour when a familiar voice called her name. Davis was hurrying down the street, a military-issue raincoat held over his head. "Margaret, wait!" He joined her under the awning, water streaming from his makeshift shelter. "I saw you leave just before the rain started. Thought you might need this." He offered her the raincoat. "Thank you, but I cannot take your coat," Margaret protested, her English still formal but increasingly fluent. "You will get wet." "I'm already wet," he pointed out with a laugh. "Besides, my quarters are closer than your home." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, listening to the rain pound against the pavement. "Your English is improving fast," Davis said finally. "You have a good ear for it." "I practice whenever possible," Margaret replied. "My father does not know I attend the classes. He would not approve." Davis nodded, unsurprised. "I've seen how some of the older folks look at us. It's not so different from home in some ways." This piqued Margaret's curiosity. "There is prejudice in America too." "Yes, but it's complicated," Davis said carefully. "Different in some ways, the same in others. People fear what they don't understand." The rain began to slacken, but neither seemed eager to leave the shelter of the awning and the unexpected privacy it provided. "May I ask you something, Samuel?" Margaret ventured, using his first name for the first time. "Of course. Why did you fight for America when America doesn't treat you equally?" The question caught Davis off guard. It was perceptive, direct, and more sophisticated than he would have expected, from someone whose exposure to racial issues came primarily from wartime propaganda. He considered his answer carefully. "Because America, for all its flaws, is still my home, see," he said slowly, "and because the promise of America is worth fighting for, even if the reality doesn't always match that promise. My father fought in the last war for the same reason. He believed that proving our worth as soldiers would help earn equal treatment as citizens." "Did it?" Margaret asked. Davis smiled ruefully. "Not as much as he hoped, but some things changed, and maybe this war will change more." The rain had dwindled to a light drizzle. "I should go," Margaret said reluctantly. "My parents will worry." "Take the coat," Davis insisted. "You can return it at the next class." Margaret hesitated, then accepted the raincoat. "Thank you, Samuel." "Sam," he corrected with a smile. "My friends call me Sam." As summer transitioned to autumn, Mannheim gradually emerged from the immediate post-war chaos. Basic utilities were restored in most areas, food became marginally more available, and the massive task of rebuilding began in earnest. The American military presence remained substantial, but its nature evolved from occupation towards something closer to administration and assistance. For the men of the 761st, this period brought increased interaction with the civilian population. They were no longer just symbols of defeat, but increasingly recognized as individuals with distinct personalities and skills. Lieutenant Hendricks encouraged this humanization while maintaining necessary discipline and boundaries. "Remember," he reminded his men during a September briefing, "we're not just representing the U.S. Army here. For many of these people, we're representing all Black Americans. Every interaction shapes how they'll think about us for generations to come." This responsibility weighed particularly heavily on Samuel Davis, whose friendship with Margaret Weber had deepened through the English classes and occasional accidental meetings around town. Nothing improper had occurred between them. Both were too conscious of the multiple boundaries they were approaching, but their mutual attraction had become impossible to ignore. The situation came to a crisis point in early October. Otto Weber, increasingly suspicious of his daughter's extended absences, followed her one evening and discovered her attending the English class where Davis was assisting. He waited outside, his anger building with each passing minute, until the class concluded and students began to disperse. When Margaret emerged, conversing animatedly with Davis about a point of grammar, Otto stepped forward from the shadows. "Margaret," he said, his voice cold with fury. "Come here immediately." Margaret froze, the color draining from her face. "Father, Not another word," Otto interrupted. "You have directly disobeyed me and brought shame upon this family." Davis straightened to his full height, his military bearing automatic in the face of confrontation. "Sir, your daughter has done nothing wrong. These classes are authorized by the military government and open to all citizens." Otto ignored him completely, addressing Margaret, as if Davis weren't present. "Come home now, or do not come home at all." The ultimatum hung in the air, stark and uncompromising. Margaret looked from her father to Davis, torn between filial duty and emerging independence. "Father, please," she began, "if you would just listen." My daughter does not consort with— Otto stopped himself before completing the slur, aware enough of his precarious position under military occupation. She does not consort with foreign soldiers. It is a matter of family honor. Davis took a deliberate step back, understanding the volatility of the situation. Margaret, you should go with your father. We can discuss the English lessons another time. His diplomatic response only seemed to infuriate Otto further. There will be no another time. Not with you, not with any of them. Margaret, her face burning with humiliation, finally moved to her father's side. I'm sorry, she whispered to Davis, before allowing Otto to lead her away into the gathering darkness. The walk home was conducted in rigid silence, Otto's arm firmly guiding Margaret forward. Only when they had entered their house, where Helena waited anxiously, did he finally speak. You are forbidden from leaving this house except in my or your mother's company, he declared. No more classes, no more wandering the streets, no more disgraceful behavior. Otto, Helena interjected, alarmed by his vehemence. Surely that's excessive. Margaret has done nothing inappropriate. Nothing inappropriate, Otto repeated incredulously. She lied to us for months. She has been spending her evenings with— Again. He stopped himself from using the derogatory term that sprang to his lips. With Americans, Helena finished for him, learning their language, preparing for a future that will undoubtedly include them, whether we like it or not. Otto turned to his wife in disbelief. You're defending this deception, this betrayal of everything we've taught her? I'm defending our daughter's right to learn and grow, Helena replied, with a firmness that surprised both Otto and Margaret. The world has changed, Otto. We must change with it, or we'll be left behind. For the first time in their marriage, Otto found himself unable to impose his will through force of personality alone. Something had shifted in their family dynamic, just as something had shifted in Germany itself. Old certainties were crumbling, leaving uncomfortable questions in their place. We will discuss this later, he said finally, retreating to his study and closing the door with deliberate control. Left alone in the living room, mother and daughter regarded each other with new understanding. Did you know? Margaret asked softly. About the classes? I suspected, Helena admitted. You've been using English phrases in your sleep. She hesitated, then added, and about the young man. Margaret looked down. Samuel, Private Davis, has been very kind. He's different from what father thinks. They often are when we get to know them as people rather than ideas, Helena said. She took her daughter's hands in hers. Your father loves you, Margaret. Everything he does, even when he's wrong, comes from that love and his desire to protect you. From what? From whom? Margaret asked with sudden intensity. Samuel has never been anything but respectful. He's educated, thoughtful, kind, everything father should want for me and a friend. But you want more than friendship, Helena observed. Not a question, but a statement. Margaret didn't deny it. I don't know what I want, Mother. I only know that when I'm with him I feel possibilities. Like the world is bigger and brighter than I ever imagined. Helena sighed, recognizing the emotion in her daughter's voice. The heart doesn't always choose convenient paths, Margaret, but remember that emotions born in extraordinary times don't always survive in ordinary ones. War creates connections that peace might not sustain. This isn't because of the war, Margareta insisted. It's despite it. Helena stroked her daughter's hair gently. Perhaps, but your father will never see it that way, not yet, maybe not ever. The following day, Otto Weber visited Lieutenant Hendrick's office, bypassing normal protocols with the determination of a man on a mission. After waiting nearly an hour, he was finally admitted to see the American officer. Herr Weber, Hendricks greeted him, rising from behind his desk. What can I do for you? Otto came directly to the point. I want to file a complaint against one of your men. Private Davis has been making inappropriate advances toward my daughter. Hendrick's expression remained neutral, though his eyes sharpened. That's a serious accusation. Do you have evidence of these inappropriate advances? He has been using the English classes to single her out for special attention, Otto stated. He has walked her home, given her his military coat, engaged her in private conversations. I see, Hendricks said carefully, And did your daughter object to any of these interactions? Otto flushed. Her feelings are irrelevant. She is 17 years old and under my authority. I explicitly forbade such fraternization. Hendricks considered the man before him. He had dealt with dozens of similar complaints since taking command in Mannheim, though usually regarding white soldiers. The racial element added another layer of complexity to an already delicate situation. Herr Weber, I understand your concerns as a father, Hendricks said finally. I will speak with Private Davis about maintaining appropriate professional boundaries during educational programs. However, he continued, raising a hand to forestall Otto's interruption, I must point out that offering a coat during rainfall or walking someone home after dark does not constitute misconduct under military regulations. So you will do nothing? Otto demanded. I didn't say that, Hendricks corrected him. I said I would speak with Private Davis, but I should also inform you that your daughter, while a minor under German law, is considered an adult under military occupation protocols regarding civilian interaction. If she chooses to attend authorized educational programs, that is her right. Otto's face darkened. You Americans come here preaching democracy while undermining parental authority and natural social order. Interesting observation, Hendricks replied, his voice cooling slightly. I wonder what natural social order you're referring to, Herr Weber. The implied question hung in the air, a challenge that Otto chose not to engage directly. Instead, he switched tactics. Lieutenant, surely you can see this situation from my perspective. The occupation is temporary. Eventually, your forces will leave and we Germans will need to rebuild our society. What place will there be for a girl who has associated with foreign soldiers? Hendricks leaned forward. Mr. Weber, let me be perfectly clear. The Germany that believed in racial hierarchies and blood purity is gone. It will not be coming back. The Germany your daughter will live in, the Germany you will live in, will be fundamentally different. That's not American propaganda. That's reality. Otto stood rigidly, his worldview colliding painfully with the new order being imposed around him. You have my complaint, Lieutenant. What you do with it is apparently your decision. After Otto left, Hendricks immediately summoned Private Davis to his office. The young mechanic arrived promptly, his uniform impeccable, his expression betraying nothing of his inner thoughts. I wanted to see me, sir. At ease, Davis, Hendricks said, gesturing to a chair. I've just had a visit from Otto Weber, Margaret's father. Davis' composure slipped momentarily before he regained control. Yes, sir. We met briefly yesterday evening. He's filed a complaint alleging inappropriate behavior toward his daughter, Hendricks continued, watching Davis closely. Anything you want to tell me? Davis met his commanding officer's gaze directly. Sir, I've maintained proper conduct at all times. Margaret, Miss Weber, is a student in the English classes. We've spoken before and after sessions, always in public. During a rainstorm, I offered her my raincoat for the walk home. That's the extent of our interaction. And your feelings toward her? Davis hesitated, knowing that honesty might complicate his situation, but unwilling to lie to an officer who had always treated him fairly. I respect and admire her, sir. Under different circumstances, I might have hoped for something more, but I understand the reality of our situation. Hendricks nodded, appreciating the candor. Davis, you're one of my best men. Your service record is exemplary. I'm not going to punish you for being a gentleman, but I am going to reassign you to headquarters duty for the next few weeks. No more teaching assistants at the community center. I understand, sir, Davis replied, his disappointment evident despite his professional demeanor. This isn't just about appeasing an angry father, Hendricks explained. It's about protecting both of you. Fraternization, especially across both military and racial lines, creates vulnerabilities. The war may be over, but we're still in hostile territory in many ways. Yes, sir, Davis acknowledged. Will that be all? Hendricks studied the younger man thoughtfully. Davis, let me speak to you not as your commanding officer, but as someone who's seen more of the world. Whatever you feel for this girl, and whatever she might feel for you, the obstacles are enormous. Even in peacetime, even in America, a relationship like that would face tremendous opposition. Here now, it would be nearly impossible. "With all due respect, sir," Davis replied, "impossible situations are what this unit specializes in." A hint of a smile touched Hendrick's lips. "Fair point. Dismissed, Private." As October gave way to November, Mannheim prepared for its first winter under occupation. Fuel was scarce, food even scarcer, and the approaching cold raised serious concerns about survival for the most vulnerable citizens. The American forces, now transitioning from conquerors to caretakers, launched winterization programs, distributing salvaged building materials for repairs and organizing coal rations for heating. Within the Weber household, an uneasy truce had been established. Otto had relaxed the strictest of his restrictions, allowing Margaret limited freedom of movement, provided she was accompanied by her mother or another suitable chaperone. Helena had quietly but firmly insisted on this modification, pointing out that complete isolation would only increase their daughter's fascination with the forbidden. Margaret, for her part, maintained outward compliance while nursing her private thoughts. She had not seen Samuel Davis since the confrontation outside the English class, though she had heard through community gossip that he had been reassigned to administrative duties. The separation, rather than diminishing her feelings, had crystallized them into something more definite than before. One crisp afternoon in mid-November, Helena suggested they visit the newly reopened market near the town center. "The American quartermaster has released some surplus supplies," she explained to Otto. "Nothing extravagant, but they say there might be coffee and sugar." Otto, who had once dismissed American rations as charity he would never accept, now simply nodded. Pragmatism had gradually replaced pride as winter approached. "Be careful," he said, his standard warning whenever they left the house. The market was busier than Margaret had expected, with perhaps 100 Mannheim residents examining the modest offerings at various stalls. American military police patrolled casually, their presence now an accepted part of daily life. Helena moved methodically from vendor to vendor, examining potential purchases with the careful eye of a housewife accustomed to making little stretch far. As they approached a stall selling refurbished household items, pots with mended handles, chairs with replaced legs, Margaret suddenly froze. Samuel Davis stood at the adjacent bookstall, apparently off-duty, examining a volume of what appeared to be German poetry. Helena followed her daughter's gaze and immediately understood. "You should say hello," she said quietly. "I'll be right here." Margaret turned to her mother in surprise. "Are you certain?" "A proper greeting in a public place is perfectly acceptable," Helena replied, her expression neutral but her eyes conveying deeper understanding. "I trust your judgment, Margaret." Heart pounding, Margaret approached the bookstall. Davis looked up as she drew near, his face registering momentary shock before settling into careful neutrality. "Miss Weber," he said formally, acknowledging her with a slight nod. "How are you?" "I am well, thank you," Margaret replied, equally formal though her eyes conveyed more. "And you, Private Davis?" "Can't complain," he said, then added with the hint of a smile, "though the English classes aren't the same without our most dedicated student." Margaret glanced back at her mother, who was deliberately focusing on kitchenware while maintaining peripheral awareness of her daughter. "My mother is here with me today, perhaps. Would you like to meet her?" The question carried weight far beyond its simple words. Davis understood the significance immediately. An introduction to family represented a step across multiple boundaries. "I would be honored," he said sincerely. They walked together the short distance to where Helena stood. "Mother," Margaret said in German, "this is Private Samuel Davis, who was teaching at the English classes. Private Davis, this is my mother, Helena Weber." Davis offered a respectful nod. "Ma'am, it's a pleasure to meet you." Helena studied the young soldier with undisguised curiosity. This was the man who had captured her daughter's attention, who represented both threat and possibility to her future. What she saw was a poised, well-spoken individual whose bearing reflected discipline and intelligence. "Private Davis," she acknowledged in accented but understandable English. "Margaret has mentioned your help with her studies." "Your daughter is an exceptional student," Davis replied. "She has a natural gift for languages." The conversation proceeded cautiously, each participant aware of its unusual nature, but committed to maintaining propriety. They spoke of neutral topics, the improving conditions in town, the approaching winter, the books Davis had been examining. Heine, Helena noted, seeing the volume he still held, an interesting choice for an American. The translation, unfortunately, Davis admitted. My German is limited to military phrases and a few food items. The bookseller recommended it as poetry that survives translation reasonably well. Heine understood exile and belonging to multiple worlds, Helena observed. Perhaps that's why his work translates effectively. The insight surprised Davis, revealing unexpected depth in this quiet German housewife. I hadn't considered that angle, he said thoughtfully. Their conversation might have continued longer had fate not intervened again. Otto Weber, having finished work earlier than expected, had decided to join his family at the market. He spotted them from across the square, his wife and daughter conversing with the very soldier he had complained about officially. Otto's approach was deliberately measured, each step controlled despite the anger evident in his rigid posture. Helena saw him first, her expression warning Margaret before she could turn to see her father drawing near. Herr Weber, Davis said calmly, offering a respectful nod despite their previous hostile encounter. Otto ignored the greeting entirely. Helena, he said in German, it's time to return home now. Helena placed a restraining hand on her husband's arm. Otto, Private Davis was just discussing German poetry. He has an interest in Heine. The absurdity of the statement, this foreign soldier presuming to appreciate German cultural treasures, momentarily left Otto speechless. Before he could formulate a response, Davis spoke again. Sir, I apologize if my presence is unwelcome. I merely wanted to convey my respect for your daughter's academic achievements and to meet her mother properly. Otto turned to Davis, finally acknowledging him directly. You have no place in my family's life, Private. Not now, not ever. Whatever game you're playing ends today. The blunt statement cut through the careful civility they had been maintaining. Davis straightened, his dignity intact despite the insult. With all due respect, sir, this isn't a game to me, he said quietly. Your daughter and your wife are remarkable women deserving of courtesy and honest conversation. That's all I've offered. Samuel, Margareta interjected, using his first name deliberately. It's all right. We should go. The use of the soldier's given name was not lost on Otto, whose face darkened further. Yes, we should, he agreed coldly, immediately. As the Weber family departed, Margareta glanced back once, meeting Davis's eyes across the growing distance between them. In that moment something passed between them, a promise, a recognition, a defiance of circumstances that sought to dictate the boundaries of human connection. The winter of 1945 to 1946 proved to be one of the harshest in living memory, not only in its meteorological severity, but also in the hardships it imposed on a population already devastated by war. Mannheim, like much of Germany, faced critical shortages of food, fuel, and medicine. The occupation forces, now settled into their role as administrators rather than conquerors, worked to mitigate the worst suffering. But resources were stretched thin across a continent in ruins. For the Weber family, pride gradually gave way to pragmatism. Otto, once adamantly opposed to accepting American assistance, now queued alongside his neighbors for coal allocations and emergency rations. The factory where he worked had partially reopened under Allied supervision, producing basic infrastructure components needed for reconstruction, rather than the precision instruments of its wartime operation. Despite the confrontation at the market, Margaret had not abandoned her interest in Samuel Davis. Through carefully cultivated connections with other young women who worked as clerks and translators for the Americans, she managed to send and receive occasional messages, maintaining a tenuous connection despite her father's prohibitions. Helena Weber, caught between her husband's rigid positions and her daughter's determined heart, chose a path of quiet facilitation. She neither encouraged nor prevented Margaret's discreet correspondence, recognizing that her daughter had inherited Otto's stubbornness along with her own resourcefulness. By February 1946, the immediate policies of occupation began to evolve toward longer-term reconstruction. The American authorities implemented programs designed to reintroduce democratic governance, first at local levels and eventually building toward regional administration. This transition brought increased civilian autonomy, but also required greater interaction between Germans and their occupiers. Lieutenant Hendricks, now promoted to captain, met with community leaders including Otto Weber to discuss the factory's role in regional economic recovery. The plan is to increase production by 30% over the next quarter, Hendricks explained during a meeting in what had once been the factory director's office. That means more jobs, more raw materials, and ultimately more stability for Mannheim. Otto, now serving as the senior German production manager, reviewed the projections with professional detachment. These targets are ambitious but achievable if the supply chain improvements materialize, he observed. My concern is worker efficiency, given current caloric restrictions. Understood, Hendricks replied. We're arranging supplementary rations for essential industrial workers. Not ideal, but better than the current situation. Their working relationship had evolved into one of grudging mutual respect. Otto's technical expertise proved valuable to the Americans, while Hendricks' pragmatic approach to governance aligned with Otto's preference for order and predictability. They had reached an unspoken agreement to focus on professional matters and avoid the personal conflict that simmered beneath the surface. That fragile equilibrium was disrupted in March, when the military government announced a significant policy change regarding fraternization. The initial strict prohibitions, already relaxed in practice, were formally modified to permit social interactions between occupation personnel and German civilians, including supervised dances and community events intended to normalize relations. The announcement included plans for a spring festival to mark the first anniversary of liberation, featuring music, modest refreshments, and, most controversially, dancing. For many of Mannheim's older residents, this represented an unacceptable blurring of lines between occupiers and occupied. For younger citizens, it offered a rare opportunity for enjoyment after years of deprivation. The Weber household became a microcosm of this generational divide. When Margaret expressed her desire to attend with friends, Otto's reaction was predictably negative. Absolutely not, he declared at the dinner table, his fork clattering against his plate. These events have one purpose: to encourage inappropriate relations between their soldiers and German girls. I will not have my daughter participate in such a spectacle. Margaret, who had anticipated this response, presented her case with careful logic. Father, Burgomaster Hoffmann himself is endorsing the festival. The entire town council will attend with their families. Even Pastor Müller has agreed to open the event with a blessing. Let others compromise their principles if they wish, Otto replied dismissively. This family still maintains certain standards. Helena, who had been listening silently, finally intervened. Otto, Margaret will be 19 next month. She has behaved responsibly throughout this difficult time. Perhaps we should consider... Consider what? Otto interrupted. Allowing her to dance with foreign soldiers while the whole town watches. Have you both lost your minds? I would go with her, Helena continued calmly. Many respectable families will be present. To forbid her entirely would only make her more determined, Otto finished wearily. He looked at his daughter, seeing not the obedient child of years past, but a young woman with increasingly independent thoughts. Is this about him? The American from the market? Margaret met her father's gaze directly. This is about living my life, Father. Private Davis is stationed at headquarters now. He probably won't even attend. Otto studied his daughter's face, sensing the half-truth in her words. After a long moment, he sighed heavily. If you go, you will stay with your mother at all times. You will dance only with German partners, if at all. And you will return home immediately if anything inappropriate occurs. Are these terms acceptable? Both Margarete and Helena nodded, surprised by this unexpected concession. Later that evening, Helena found Otto in his study, staring at a pre-war family photograph. Thank you, she said softly. For Margaret. Otto didn't look up from the photograph. She's changing, Helena. Sometimes I hardly recognize her. She's growing up, Helena corrected gently, becoming her own person. Into what? Otto asked, genuine concern beneath his gruff exterior. What future will she have in this new world the Americans are creating? One with no traditions, no proper order? Helena sat beside her husband, taking his hand in hers. The world changed whether we wanted it to or not, Otto. Margaret is finding her way in it just as we must. Otto finally met his wife's eyes. And if that way includes him, what then? Helena didn't pretend to misunderstand. Then we will face that challenge when it comes. But pushing her away now will only ensure we have no influence when she makes such choices. The Spring Festival took place on a surprisingly warm Saturday in early April. The town square had been transformed with bunting, makeshift stages, and tables laden with modest refreshments, a far cry from pre-war celebrations, but luxurious by current standards. American supply officers had released special rations for the occasion, including real coffee, chocolate, and even small amounts of sugar. Margaret spent hours preparing, wearing her best dress, carefully mended and altered from pre-war days, and arranging her hair with help from Helena. Otto watched their preparations with resigned disapproval, but held to his agreement, even offering gruff compliments on their appearance before they departed. By mid-afternoon, nearly half of Mannheim's population had gathered in and around the square. Military police maintained a visible but unobtrusive presence, while German police handled routine security, a symbolic sharing of authority that reflected the evolving relationship between occupiers and occupied. Captain Hendricks opened the proceedings with a brief speech emphasizing cooperation and reconstruction, followed by Pastor Müller's blessing. Then the music began, a German brass band alternating with an American military ensemble, offering a cultural exchange through melodies that required no translation. Margaret and Helena moved through the crowd, greeting neighbors and accepting small refreshments. Their progress inevitably brought them near the section where American personnel gathered, including both white and black soldiers, maintaining appropriate military bearing despite the festive atmosphere. Samuel Davis stood slightly apart from his comrades, his gaze scanning the crowd until it found Margaret. Their eyes met briefly across the distance, acknowledgement passing between them without words or gestures. Both understood the delicate choreography required, no obvious interaction, nothing to provoke controversy or punishment, but perhaps, if circumstances aligned perfectly, a momentary connection. That opportunity came during a musical interlude when the German band played a traditional folk melody. As dancers formed circles temporarily mixing military and civilian participants, Margarete found herself opposite Davis in one such formation. The dance required periodic changing of partners, each person moving around the circle. When their hands briefly touched during this rotation, Davis whispered, "You look beautiful," before the movement carried him onward to the next partner. Margaret had no chance to reply, but the warmth that flooded her face spoke volumes. Helena, watching from nearby, observed this fleeting interaction with a mother's perceptiveness. She also noticed other similar moments throughout the gathering, German girls exchanging shy glances with American soldiers, tentative conversations in mixed German-English, shared laughter over cultural misunderstandings. A new reality was taking shape around them, one connection at a time. As spring gave way to summer, the occupation settled into routines that almost resembled normalcy. Mannheim's economy slowly revived, basic services improved, and the harsh deprivations of the immediate post-war period gradually eased. The Americans, once viewed exclusively as conquerors, increasingly assumed roles as partners in reconstruction, their continued presence accepted if not entirely welcomed. For the 761st Tank Battalion, including Private Davis, this period brought significant changes. Military restructuring led to reassignment orders for many units, with some soldiers returning to America, while others were consolidated into occupation forces with longer-term commitments. During this transition, Davis received unexpected news. His application for the Army's educational program had been approved, allowing him to complete his engineering studies while remaining in military service. The program would begin that autumn at a newly established American Education Center in Frankfurt. When Margaret learned of this development through their cautious correspondence, she recognized both opportunity and challenge. Frankfurt was more than 100 kilometers from Mannheim, close enough to maintain connection but far enough to require deliberate effort. Moreover, it offered a possible path forward, away from the suffocating constraints of Mannheim's provincial attitudes. In late June, Margarete approached her parents with a carefully considered proposal. "I've been offered a position as a translator and office assistant at the new American Education Center in Frankfurt," she explained over dinner, her voice steady despite her internal nervousness. "The pay is good, and they provide housing for German staff. I would begin in August." Otto's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "And how exactly did this offer come about?" "Through Frau Zimmermann at the community center," Margaret replied, referring to the respectable widow who coordinated local translation services. "She recommended me based on my English progress." This was true, though incomplete. Frau Zimmermann had indeed recommended Margaret, but only after Davis had mentioned the position to her, creating the connection indirectly. "Frankfurt is very far," Helena observed neutrally. "You would be on your own for the first time." "Many young women my age are working with the occupation authorities," Margaret pointed out. "It's respectable employment with good conditions, better than anything available here." Otto set down his utensils deliberately. "And I suppose it's merely coincidence that your American friend will also be in Frankfurt." Margaret had anticipated this question. "Private Davis mentioned he's been accepted to an educational program there. Yes, but that's not why I'm considering this opportunity. This is about my future, my career." "Your career," Otto repeated, the concept itself foreign to his traditional worldview. "A young woman doesn't need a career. She needs a proper husband and family." "And how will I find this proper husband, father?" Margarete challenged, her patience fraying. "Half the men my age never returned from the war. Those who did are broken in body or spirit. Meanwhile, I have a chance for meaningful work, for independence." "For scandal," Otto interrupted. "For disgrace. Do you think I don't understand what this is really about? You want freedom to pursue this, inappropriate attachment." Helena placed her hand on Otto's arm. "Otto, please, let's discuss this rationally. There's nothing rational about our daughter abandoning her family and heritage to chase after—" "After what, father?" Margaret demanded, rising from her chair. "Say it. After what?" The challenge hung in the air between them. Otto stared at his daughter, seeing not the obedient child of memory, but a woman with her own determination, a determination that mirrored his own. "After a fantasy," he said finally. "A relationship that has no future. Even if this man's intentions are honorable, which I doubt, what life could you possibly build together? Where would you live? How would you be treated? Have you considered any of these practical questions?" The questions struck closer to Margaret's own private doubts than she cared to admit. "Those are challenges for us to address if our relationship develops," she replied, her voice quieter but no less firm. "But I can't even discover if there's a possibility without some independence." Otto turned to his wife, seeking alliance. "Helena, surely you see the danger in this." Helena looked between her husband and daughter, measuring her words carefully. "I see a young woman trying to find her path in a world that's changed dramatically. I see her father trying to protect her from harm, as he always has." She paused, then added, "But Otto, I also remember when I was 19, and my father forbade me from seeing a certain young factory worker, because he wasn't from the right family." Otto's expression softened slightly at this unexpected reference to their own courtship. "That was different," he protested, but with less conviction. "Was it?" Helena asked gently. "You proved yourself worthy despite my father's objections. Perhaps we should give Samuel Davis the same opportunity." The use of the soldier's full name, acknowledging him as a person rather than an abstraction, shifted the conversation's dynamic subtly but significantly. After several days of tense negotiation, a compromise emerged. Margaret would accept the position in Frankfurt, but with conditions. She would live in the approved women's dormitory, write home weekly, and return to Mannheim monthly for family visits. Otto, while still opposed in principle, recognized that directly forbidding his adult daughter would likely result in complete estrangement. In early August, Margaret departed for Frankfurt with 2 suitcases containing her modest possessions. The farewell at Mannheim's partially rebuilt train station was emotional but restrained, German propriety maintaining appearances despite the turmoil beneath. "Remember who you are," Otto told his daughter stiffly. "Remember your family." "I will, father," Margaret promised, embracing him briefly before turning to her mother. Helena held her daughter tightly. "Be careful," she whispered, "but also be happy." As the train pulled away, carrying Margaret toward an uncertain future, Otto and Helena Weber stood side by side on the platform, a physical gap between them reflecting the emotional distance that had grown during recent months. "She'll come back," Otto said, more wish than prediction. Helena slipped her hand into his, an unexpected gesture of solidarity. Perhaps, but not as the same person who left. In Frankfurt, Margarete discovered a world far removed from provincial Mannheim. The American presence was more established, the interaction between Germans and occupiers more fluid and normalized. The education center where she worked served both military personnel completing their studies and German civilians participating in democratization programs. Her position as a translator and office assistant kept her busy with legitimate responsibilities, but also brought her into regular contact with Samuel Davis, now enrolled in engineering courses while maintaining his military status. Their relationship, no longer constrained by Mannheim's scrutiny, developed naturally through shared meals at the center's cafeteria, walks along the partially reconstructed riverfront, and occasional cultural events approved for mixed attendance. By autumn, they had become an acknowledged couple within Frankfurt's unusual social ecosystem, not the only relationship crossing national and racial lines, but still an exception rather than the rule. They faced curious stares, occasional hostility, and administrative obstacles, but also found unexpected support from forward-thinking individuals in both communities. Captain Hendricks, now serving as an educational liaison in Frankfurt, observed their relationship with cautious approval. "Davis is a good man," he told Margaret during a chance encounter at the center's library. "One of my best soldiers, steady, intelligent, reliable." "I know," Margaret replied simply. Hendricks studied her thoughtfully. "This won't be an easy path, Miss Weber, for either of you." "Few worthwhile paths are easy, Captain," she answered, "especially now." The officer nodded, recognizing the truth in her words. "If you ever need assistance, professional assistance," he clarified, "my office is open to you." That winter, Margarete maintained her promised monthly visits to Mannheim, though each return revealed the growing distance between her past and present. Her parents listened to carefully edited accounts of her work and life, while she endured Otto's increasingly half-hearted attempts to introduce her to suitable young German men from respectable families. Helena, more perceptive than her husband chose to be, recognized the signs of her daughter's deepening attachment. During a private moment while preparing Sunday dinner in December, she broached the subject directly. "Are you happy, Margaret? Truly?" Margaret considered the question seriously. "Yes," she answered finally. "Despite the difficulties, despite the uncertainties, yes, I am." "And Samuel?" Helena asked, using his first name naturally now. "Is he worthy of you?" "He's the finest man I've ever known," Margaret replied without hesitation. "Kind, honorable, brilliant in his work, he treats me as an equal, respects my thoughts, encourages my ambitions." Helena nodded slowly. "Your father won't accept this easily, perhaps not ever." "I know," Margaret acknowledged sadly. "But I can't live my life to satisfy his prejudices." "No," Helena agreed, "you can't. But understanding doesn't make the pain any less for either of you." When 1947 arrived, it brought new policies affecting occupation forces. The military government implemented fraternization reform, officially permitting relationships between American personnel and German civilians, subject to certain protocols and approvals. For couples like Margaret and Samuel, this represented formal recognition of what had previously existed in a grey area of reluctant tolerance. In March, during one of her visits home, Margaret finally gathered the courage to speak openly with her parents about her relationship. The three sat in their modest living room. The physical comfort of their home improved over the past year, but the emotional atmosphere tense with unspoken thoughts. "I need to tell you something important," Margaret began, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Samuel has asked me to marry him. I've accepted." The statement, direct and unambiguous, fell into the room like a stone into still water, ripples of reaction spreading outward. Otto closed his eyes briefly, as if the words caused physical pain. Helena reached for her husband's hand. Whether to comfort him or restrain him wasn't clear. "Absolutely not," Otto said finally, his voice low but intense. "I forbid it." "Father, I'm 20 years old," Margaret reminded him gently. "I'm not asking permission. I'm informing you of my decision, hoping for your blessing, but prepared to proceed without it." Otto rose abruptly, pacing the small room. "Do you have any idea what this means? What people will say, how they'll treat you, treat us?" "Yes," Margaret replied steadily. "We've considered everything. The legal requirements, the military protocols, the social implications. It won't be simple, but it's possible." "Possible," Otto repeated bitterly. "A lifetime of difficulty, prejudice, exclusion, and you call that possible? The world is changing, Father. Germany is changing. America too." "Not enough," Otto insisted. "Not nearly enough for what you're proposing." Helena, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. "Where would you live? Have you thought about that?" "Initially in Frankfurt while Samuel completes his education," Margaret explained. "Then likely America, though we're open to opportunities here if reconstruction creates them." "America," Otto said, as if the word itself was painful, "where you'll be treated as an enemy by some, and he'll be treated as less than human by others. What kind of life is that?" "One we'll build together," Margaret answered. "One step at a time." The discussion continued for hours, circling through practical concerns, emotional appeals, and increasingly honest confrontations with the underlying issues of prejudice and fear. No resolution was reached that day, or in the weeks that followed. Otto maintained his opposition while Helena adopted a position of cautious neutrality, unwilling to openly defy her husband, but equally unwilling to abandon her daughter. By summer, the wedding plans had progressed despite Otto's continued objections. The ceremony would take place in Frankfurt under military jurisdiction, which simplified some legal barriers, but created others. Samuel's family in Philadelphia responded with mixed emotions to his letters, his mother expressing guarded support, his father concerned about practical difficulties, his siblings divided between enthusiasm and apprehension. Captain Hendricks, in what would be one of his final actions before rotating back to America, arranged for the necessary military approvals and offered to host a modest reception at the officers' club, a significant gesture of support from the command structure. 1 week before the scheduled ceremony, Margaret made a final visit to Mannheim, hoping against hope for some resolution with her father. She found both parents waiting for her at the station, an unexpected sight that momentarily raised her spirits. The conversation at home began awkwardly, weighted with unspoken thoughts and feelings accumulated over months of conflict. Finally, Otto cleared his throat and addressed his daughter directly. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "about what your mother said, about us when we were young." Margaret glanced at Helena, who nodded encouragingly. "Your grandfather objected to me because my family had no standing, no education," Otto continued. "He thought Helena deserved better, and perhaps he was right from his perspective." "Father," Margaret began, but Otto raised his hand. "Let me finish. I worked every day of our marriage to prove him wrong, to be worthy of your mother, to build a life that would justify her choice." He paused, struggling visibly with his next words. "If this man, if Samuel, loves you even half as much as I love your mother, he'll do the same. And perhaps that's not the worst foundation for a marriage." Margaret stared at her father, scarcely believing what she was hearing. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I still think you're making a difficult choice," Otto clarified. "One that will bring challenges I wouldn't wish for you. But I'm also saying that I can't bear the thought of losing my daughter entirely." Helena moved to stand beside her husband, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "What your father is trying to say, Margaret, is that we'll be at your wedding." The ceremony took place on July 12, 1947, in the small chapel of the American Education Center. Captain Hendricks served as best man, while Elsa Schmidt, Margaret's friend from Mannheim, who had also found employment in Frankfurt, stood as maid of honor. A military chaplain performed the service in both English and German, emphasizing themes of unity and hope that transcended national and cultural differences. Otto and Helena Weber sat in the front row, their presence a powerful statement, despite Otto's rigid posture and carefully neutral expression. Throughout the ceremony, Helena held her husband's hand firmly, a physical connection anchoring him through this experience that challenged a lifetime of beliefs and assumptions. When Samuel and Margaret exchanged vows, their words bridged not only personal commitment, but also the broader divisions of a world struggling to redefine itself after unprecedented conflict. Their kiss, sealing these promises, represented more than individual love. It symbolized possibility in a time desperate for hope. At the reception, Otto surprised everyone, including perhaps himself, by approaching Samuel during a quiet moment. "I have one thing to say to you," he began formally. "My daughter believes in you, proves herself worthy of that belief every day." Samuel met his father-in-law's gaze directly. "Sir, I will spend my life trying to be worthy of her. You have my word on that." Otto nodded once, acknowledging the promise. No embrace followed, no dramatic reconciliation, just a fragile beginning, a small crack in a wall of prejudice that would take years, perhaps generations, to fully dismantle. The Weber-Davis marriage was not unique, though still uncommon enough to attract attention. Throughout occupied Germany, particularly in urban centers with substantial American presence, similar relationships developed, despite institutional and cultural barriers. Military records from 1945 through 1952 document over 2,000 marriages between African-American soldiers and German women, each representing a personal challenge to established norms on both sides. Samuel completed his engineering degree in 1949, and the couple emigrated to America the following year, settling initially in Philadelphia near his family. They faced discrimination from multiple directions. Margaret's German origins still carried wartime associations, while their interracial marriage violated social taboos in many communities. Yet they persevered, eventually establishing themselves in Detroit, where Samuel's technical expertise found appreciation in the automotive industry's post-war expansion. Otto and Helena Weber remained in Mannheim as Germany rebuilt itself from the ashes of defeat. Otto never fully embraced his daughter's choice, but maintained connection through regular correspondence and rare visits. When his first grandchild was born in 1952, a boy named Martin Otto Davis, in honor of Margaret's fallen brother, something shifted in the elder Weber's perspective, family bonds gradually superseding ingrained prejudice. The children of these unions, including young Martin, grew up straddling multiple worlds, American and German, black and white, inheriting both the burdens of history and the promise of a more integrated future. Their very existence testified to the possibility of connection across seemingly impermeable boundaries, even in the aftermath of humanity's darkest chapter. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.